The morning had unfolded without urgency, the kind that arrives gently across the plains, carried on thin light and drifting dust. Grass shifted slowly under passing wind, and insects stitched quiet patterns through the air. From a distance, the male lion blended easily into that stillness, his tawny body half hidden beneath tall stems, his mane darkened by shadow and soil. At first there was nothing unusual in his posture. He lay on his side as countless lions had before, resting between hunts, conserving energy for heat yet to come. But as the ranger's gaze lingered, something unsettled its rhythm. The rise and fall of the lion's chest was faint, irregular, barely visible. Each breath seemed delayed, as though the body hesitated before allowing air to return. The stillness around him no longer felt natural. It felt fragile. The ranger slowed his steps, letting each foot settle carefully into the dust. Nearby researchers followed without words, sensing the change in atmosphere before it was spoken. The grass parted in narrow waves as they approached, revealing more of the lion's form. His foreleg lay twisted slightly inward, muscles tight but unmoving. One ear twitched once, then stilled. His eyes remained closed, lashes pressed against dusty fur. When a breeze lifted strands of his mane, it exposed faint traces of dried blood near his shoulder, darkened almost to black. A shallow cut traced downward along his ribs, partly hidden by mud. No flies gathered yet, no scavengers circled. The injury was recent. Whatever had happened quietly. One ranger murmured, "Easy, easy boy," barely louder than breath, more for steadiness than response. They stopped several paces away, forming a loose arc around him, leaving open space for retreat if needed. No one rushed forward. Hands remained low. Radio stayed silent. The lion's breathing grew more visible now, short expansions followed by long pauses, each pause stretching a little too far. Occasionally, his tail tip moved in slow, uncertain arcs, brushing the grass as if searching for balance. His whiskers trembled once. A low sound escaped his throat, not a roar or growl but something thinner, almost hollow. It faded quickly, swallowed by open air. The team exchanged quiet glances. Their faces reflected concern without panic. Experience had taught them that haste could undo more than it helped. As the sun lifted higher, light slipped between stems and touched the lion's flank, revealing subtle tremors beneath the skin. Dust settled on his fur and stayed there. He did not shake it away. One researcher knelt carefully, whispering, "We're here," more as reassurance to herself than to him. The savanna continued its slow movement around them. Birds passed overhead. Far away, a herd shifted direction, hooves dull against earth. In the middle of it all, the lion remained suspended between strength and collapse, breath by breath, held in place by fragile endurance. Wind moved through the grass in long silver waves, and for a moment, it seemed to cradle his body, carrying quiet hope through every trembling blade. Movement came slowly, measured in inches rather than steps. The team adjusted their positions with care, letting the lion remain unaware of any sudden shift in space. One ranger crouched lower, using a long blade of grass to gently brush aside dust near the animal's shoulder. With each light stroke, more of the wound emerged. What had seemed like a shallow cut revealed itself as a deep tear beneath the fur, where skin had split and darkened blood had hardened into brittle layers. The edges were swollen, uneven, marked by signs of struggle. Sand and plant fibers clung stubbornly to the surface, pressed in by time and movement. The injury ran farther than first assumed, disappearing beneath muscle and shadow. It was not the clean mark of a single claw. It spoke of collision, of force, of something heavy and unyielding met at speed. The lion stirred faintly as the air shifted around his body. His eyelids fluttered, opening just enough to expose a narrow strip of amber before closing again. A soft tremor traveled along his jaw. His breathing grew uneven, faster for a moment, then slowed as if pulled back by exhaustion. One paw flexed weakly, claws extending halfway before retreating into fur. The movement lacked strength, more reflex than intention. When the ranger shifted his weight, a low sound rose from the lion's chest, rough and incomplete, fading almost as soon as it formed. It was not a warning. It was an expression of confusion, of a body trying to respond despite failing signals. They paused again, allowing stillness to settle. A researcher slowly removed a small cloth from her pack and held it loosely, waiting for the right moment. Dust continued to fall from nearby stems, landing across the lion's ribs and nose. He did not react. Only his whiskers quivered once, brushing against the soil. A second ranger leaned slightly closer and whispered, "It's okay, we've got you." the words shaped softly without expectation of understanding. The lion's ear twitched in response, just enough to show awareness. His head shifted a fraction, pressing deeper into the grass as if seeking concealment. More of the wound became visible as the dust was cleared away. The tissue beneath glistened faintly, swollen and tender, bordered by fur matted into stiff ridges. A thin line of fresh blood slowly formed near the lower edge, tracing its way downward before disappearing into dirt. The sight drew quiet breaths from the team. No one spoke. Their attention remained fixed on subtle changes in posture, in breath, in muscle tone. They watched for signs of collapse, for sudden panic, for any surge of strength that might turn fear into danger. The lion opened his eyes again, wider this time. They moved briefly, unfocused, drifting across shapes and shadows. When they met the nearest ranger, they did not hold. They slipped away heavy with fatigue. His tail dragged weak patterns through the grass, tracing loops that never fully closed. A small shudder passed through his frame, then settled. Around them, cicadas resumed their rhythm. Wind bent the grass into slow arcs. The team remained where they were, steady and patient, while the wounded lion hovered between resistance and surrender, held upright only by fading strength and the quiet persistence of breath. Time loosened its grip as the team began their work, stretching each moment into something careful and deliberate. Nothing was rushed. Every movement was weighed against the lion's breathing, his faint reactions, the subtle tension that still lived beneath his exhaustion. A ranger knelt slowly, keeping his body low and open, allowing the animal to see him without feeling surrounded. Another prepared clean water from a sealed container, pouring it gently into a shallow basin. The sound was barely audible, a thin whisper against metal. Even that seemed loud in the fragile quiet that had formed around them. With slow precision, a cloth was dipped and lifted, excess water pressed away between steady fingers. It touched the edge of the wound first, not the center, testing how much the lion would tolerate. His body tightened at once. A tremor passed through his flank. His breathing quickened for several shallow cycles, then faltered. One paw shifted weakly, scraping dry grass. A low, breathless sound escaped his throat. The ranger froze, holding position, allowing the lion to settle again before continuing. "Easy, easy," he murmured, voice barely more than air. When the cloth returned, it moved in small arcs, lifting dust and old blood without pulling at tender tissue. Dark residue bled into the water, clouding it. Each pass revealed more of the injury beneath, raw and swollen, framed by fur flattened into rigid lines. The process was slow, imperfect. Some debris refused to loosen. Some areas could not be touched without causing distress. They accepted those limits without frustration. Preservation mattered more than completion. The lion remained mostly still, though his awareness flickered in and out like a fading signal. At times his eyes opened briefly, glassy and unfocused. At others, his head sagged deeper into the grass. His ears rotated weakly toward soft sounds, then fell back into rest. When cool water brushed too close to exposed tissue, his muscles tightened, then relaxed again as if he no longer possessed the strength to protest. Trust did not arrive suddenly. It formed in fragments, in the absence of panic, in the choice not to rise, in the decision to remain. A second ranger applied a gentle antiseptic solution, dripping it carefully along the wound's edge. The liquid shimmered briefly in sunlight before disappearing. The lion flinched once, then stilled. His breathing grew steadier, though still shallow. A thin layer of moisture darkened his fur. His tail tip made a slow, uncertain curve, then rested. Someone whispered, "You're doing well," not as praise but as acknowledgement of effort. Bandaging was impossible in this setting. They focused instead on cleaning, cooling, reducing immediate risk. Each action carried doubt. None of them knew if infection had already spread. None could tell how much internal damage remained unseen. Still, they continued, guided by experience and restraint rather than certainty. As the sun climbed, warmth returned to the grass. Insects resumed cautious movement. The lion's body softened slightly against the earth, no longer held rigid by pain alone. He allowed their presence. He allowed their touch. In that shared stillness, between fragile breath and steady hands, something delicate took shape. Not dominance, not control, but a quiet agreement to endure together, moment by moment, without promise, without certainty, held only by patience and trust. When the final cloth was set aside and the last container sealed, the team remained where they were, allowing the air between them and the lion to settle. No one stood immediately. No one reached for equipment. Withdrawal, they knew, had to be as careful as arrival. One by one they shifted backward, easing their weight into the grass, creating space without signaling abandonment. The lion lay motionless through it all, his breathing shallow but steady, ribs lifting in small, determined motions. Dust clung to his fur where dampness had darkened it. Sunlight traced the uneven line of his spine. A long minute passed. Then another. A subtle change moved through his body. His shoulders tightened. Muscles gathered beneath skin that moments earlier had seemed almost slack. One foreleg pressed against the ground, trembling as it took a fraction of weight. The movement was slow, uncertain, interrupted by pauses that lasted several breaths. The team froze, eyes fixed, bodies angled away to reduce pressure. No one intervened. Rising, if it came, had to be his choice. With visible effort, he shifted onto his chest. His head lifted slightly, mane falling forward in dusty strands. Air rushed unevenly through his nostrils. His mouth opened just enough to release heat. For a moment, it seemed he might collapse back into the grass. His limbs shook. His balance wavered. Then inch by inch he pushed higher. One hind leg slid, recovered, found purchase. The other followed. At last he stood, swaying gently, suspended between strength and surrender. A sound gathered deep in his chest before emerging. It was low and resonant, not a roar meant to challenge, not a warning meant to scatter rivals. It carried outward in a slow, rolling wave, textured with strain and fatigue. The call rose once, fell, then rose again, softer. It traveled across the grass, threading between stems, fading into distance. The team remained still. No one spoke. No one moved. Several seconds passed before the first response appeared. Far beyond the circle of flattened grass, movement stirred. A shadow separated itself from taller stems. Then another. Then two smaller shapes followed, hesitant and low. A lioness emerged first, her posture cautious, her head held level, eyes fixed on the standing male. Behind her, partially hidden, came two half-grown cubs, their steps uneven, their bodies pressed close to her flanks. They paused often, testing scent and sound before advancing again. The wounded lion released a second, weaker call. His tail lifted slightly, then settled. The lioness responded with a soft, breathy sound, almost lost in wind. She closed the remaining distance slowly, stopping several paces away. Her gaze traveled over his body, lingering on darkened fur and damp patches. One cub stepped forward, then retreated, then approached again, curiosity and caution intertwined. The team eased farther back, becoming part of the background. Grass rose between them and the family. Human shapes dissolved into shadow and distance. The lion lowered himself carefully to the ground, folding his legs with effort. The lioness settled beside him, close enough for their shoulders to touch. One cub pressed against his flank, listening to his breathing. The other lay near his head, watching the open plains. Wind moved through the savanna in slow waves. Light softened toward afternoon. Somewhere beyond sight, a herd shifted and disappeared. In the quiet space between fading footsteps and distant calls, the family remained together, framed by grass and sky, bound by breath, presence, and the fragile continuation of life. The family did not remain long in stillness. After a time, the lioness rose first, stretching carefully, her movements fluid and alert. She paused beside the wounded male, lowering her head briefly toward his mane. He responded by shifting his weight, gathering himself slowly as though testing what strength remained. The cubs stood nearby, watching closely, their bodies angled inward, forming a loose circle of attention and concern. Nothing about the moment was hurried. It unfolded at the pace of bodies learning again how to trust motion. With deliberate effort, the lion pushed himself upright. His movements were steadier now, though still marked by caution. Each step forward was placed with care, paws pressing into dust, lifting again without stumble. The lioness moved alongside him, adjusting her speed to match his. When he faltered slightly, she slowed. When he regained balance, she followed. The cubs stayed close, sometimes brushing against his legs, sometimes darting ahead before returning. Their presence seemed to anchor him, giving shape to his direction and purpose. The team watched from a growing distance, their forms now softened by grass and light. No one raised a camera. No one whispered. They stood with hands lowered, shoulders relaxed, allowing the family to reclaim the space fully. One ranger exhaled slowly, barely aware he had been holding his breath. Another folded a cloth and placed it back into her pack with quiet finality. Their work was finished. What followed no longer belonged to them. The lion lifted his head as the group began moving eastward, toward familiar territory where scent lines and remembered paths still waited. His mane caught the low sun, turning strands of dust into faint gold. Though his gait remained uneven, There was intention in every step now. He was not drifting. He was returning. Once, he paused and glanced back, not toward the humans, but toward the open stretch of land behind him, as if measuring the distance already crossed. Then he continued. The savanna shifted into evening. Shadows lengthened. The air cooled by degrees almost too small to notice. Birds gathered along distant trees. Insects adjusted their rhythm. The landscape absorbed the quiet procession without interruption. Grass parted, closed, and parted again. The family gradually blended into the larger movement of the plains, becoming shapes among shapes, lives among countless others. When they were finally out of sight, the team turned away in unison, guided more by instinct than agreement. Footsteps were light. Equipment remained silent. No one spoke. Each person carried the moment inward, arranging it carefully among memories of storms, droughts, losses, and small victories. This one would stay. Behind them, the wind traveled freely through tall stems, carrying traces of scent and sound into open distance. Ahead, the sky softened into layered color, pale gold dissolving into muted blue. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a wounded lion walked beside his family, held upright by resilience and quiet care. And as the sun slipped lower, touching grass and dust with gentle fire, the day closed around that truth, leaving only silence, gratitude, and a lingering sense of wonder.